This week on Viewpoints.
A lot of us learned the 3 R's, reduce, reuse, recycle, but most of us just pay attention to the recycle part.
We cover how to create less waste in 2026. Then,
as one researcher puts it, nobody waves, but everyone waves back. Once you do offer that initiation and that opportunity, people are more willing to connect with you than you think.
Why are so many adults struggling to maintain close friendships? I'm Marty Peterson.
And I'm Gary Price. These stories in depth this week on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints. Scientists at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration have reported that about 8 million tons of plastic waste enters our oceans each year. Imagine every month, 2 Empire State Buildings packed with plastic being dropped into the sea. And this isn't a new phenomenon. This worldwide disregard for the environment has been happening for more than 70 years, and it's poised to only get worse. In 2019, global manufacturers made 368 million tons of plastic. That's the equivalent of almost 1,000 Empire State Buildings filled to the brim. Looking ahead, scientists predict that plastic production will double within 2 decades and even quadruple by 2050. From containers to cutlery to plastic bags, it's no secret that single-use plastics are convenient and cheap solutions for many everyday tasks. But the true cost of these products is not immediately apparent, leading many Americans to use a wide variety of plastics and just assume that they're automatically recycled.
The plastics industry has spent a lot of time and money and lobbying efforts on making us feel like if we see that chasing arrow symbol, that the packaging is recyclable, and as long as we put it in the bin, everything's going to be just fine. But that's really not the case.
That's Jenny Romer, an attorney, environmental activist, and the author of Can I Recycle This? A Guide to Better Recycling and How to Reduce Single-Use Plastics. Today, only 9% of all plastic that's ever been produced has been recycled. This is because much of the resin material is so low grade that it's not profitable for local municipalities to break it down and sell it on the commodities market.
Right now, manufacturers are not financially responsible for recycling, the cost of recycling and disposal and cleanup of their products. That's something that I've been working on. I'm an attorney at the Surfrider Foundation. We work on plastic reduction and recycling policies. And something that we're starting to see more and more of now are policies, bills that would require producers, those manufacturers, to pay for those costs rather than having that burden fall on your local jurisdiction, your city, and ratepayers and taxpayers to pay for the cost of recycling. And if we saw producers having to pay for it, we would see an incentive for producers to make their products out of recyclable materials and to see a lot of source reduction.
But currently, this is not the case. Once reaching a recycling center, a large majority of food containers, food wrappers, bottles, bags, and more are deemed unrecyclable and head directly to waste management. Romer has visited many different recycling plants across the country, from basic hand sorting centers to state-of-the-art facilities, and she encourages people to take a tour of their own local center to get a better idea of where their trash ends up. Romer lives in New York City, where the facilities near her are designed to quickly sort the incoming metal, glass, and plastic.
They use a lot of different technologies, including optical sorters, and I like to think of them as kind of lasers that are pointed at plastic containers, and they're actually cameras, and they can tell what type of plastic resin each container is made out of and shoot that container into an appropriate bin using an air gun. And then once that bin is full, they can be turned into bales, kind of like a hay bale of material, of one type of material, and that's then sold on the commodities market.
So what are the types of plastic that can be recycled and reused? Romer notes that the answer lies in the numbers.
Not all plastics are created equal. So with number 1 and number 2 plastic resins, the numbers that are within the little chasing arrow symbols on packaging, the lower numbers are more recyclable than the higher numbers. So plastic milk bottles and plastic water bottles those have a market demand. There's a buyer at the other end who wants to buy those types of plastics. But a lot of the other plastics, the number 3 through 7s, those don't have a consistent buyer. And when something doesn't have a consistent buyer, those are going to go to landfill or incineration.
So the next time you're about to throw an item into your blue recycling bin, look at the number listed in the triangular arrows at the bottom of the package. Romer says that in the U.S., for the most part, the lower value plastics, ranging from 3 to 7, end up being sent off to landfills either here or abroad.
Landfills are designed as kind of tombs. They aren't really designed to have products and packaging degrade in landfills. They're supposed to get compacted and stay there forever. And so the Federal Trade Commission regulates what can be said about recycling and composting and biodegradability. And the Federal Trade Commission says that companies should not claim that their products biodegrade in landfills, because that's really not the point of landfills.
Aside from domestic landfills, the U.S. has a long history of shipping more than half of its plastic waste to China and other developing countries. Kate Melgis is all too familiar with this process. Melgis is the plastics project leader at Greenpeace USA, a nonprofit organization focused on environmental activism. She says that the majority of these nations are ill-equipped to properly hold the waste, and much of it ends up littered throughout beaches, coastlines, and in rivers. From there, it eventually drains into our oceans. One example is the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, a floating island of litter located in the central Pacific Ocean that's roughly twice the size of Texas. While this pool of garbage is massive, scientists say it represents just a tiny fraction of the total trash currently in the ocean. So, where does the rest end up?
Most of the plastic that enters into the ocean actually ends up sinking to the seabed. So they've found plastics as deep as the Mariana Trench. I think about 1% of what is actually in the ocean is on the surface and floats, and that just happens to do with density and what's heavier than seawater, and a lot of it ends up sinking.
Late last year, a new report by CSIRO, Australia's national science agency, estimated there to be anywhere from 9 to 16 million tons of microplastics embedded on the sea floor. Compare this to the massive visible size of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, which holds only 87,000 tons of trash. Much of this plastic will never fully decompose and will break down into microplastics that wreak havoc on the environment.
Animals are eating it. They mistake plastic for food. There's fish that take bites out of plastic. I can't tell you the number of bottles and plastic trash that we've found in the ocean that have bite marks taken out of them from fish and turtles and all sorts of different animals.
Microplastics may not be as visible as a floating plastic bottle, but scientists have found evidence of these tiny shards causing problems all across the world's ecosystems.
Plastics contain chemicals that are known to be harmful to human health, so endocrine disruptors and carcinogens, and ingesting them increases our exposure to these harmful chemicals. And we're just starting to look at what that does to human health. But they are toxic chemicals that are known to cause reproductive issues and cancer and respiratory issues.
Romer says that one way governments are tackling this problem is by offering incentives to manufacturers who engage in sustainable practices and produce higher-grade plastic that can be recycled and reused.
A policy that they call EPR, or Extended Producer Responsibility, that shifts the responsibility for recycling and waste disposal to the manufacturers and incentivizes them to have more recyclable, more sustainable packaging, and ideally to shift to refill and reuse rather than just single use. And so hopefully incentivizing that infrastructure that we need in order to do things like have refillable beer bottles and milk containers and things like that, and even things like shampoo and cereal, being able to go to a store and not just kind of a crunchy health food store, but a really mainstream store to buy everything that you need without having to pay for that extra packaging.
Romer points out that while policy, law, and international cooperation are big factors, individual actions also matter. Become familiar with what items your local recycling plant accepts, and don't forget to rinse out plastic, glass, and metal before dumping it into the blue bin. Also make sure to keep bottle caps and lids attached to items. When outside the house, make an effort to be more cognizant of what you consume. Next time you order takeout from a restaurant, opt out of the cutlery and extra plastic. When you're at the store, try to buy less cheap plastic items like water bottles, single-use containers, and plastic bags.
A lot of us learned the 3 R's, reduce, reuse, recycle, but most of us just pay attention to the recycle part. So I really support refill and reuse as much as possible. And so when you're at the grocery store, if you have the option to buy from a bulk bin rather than buying something from a store shelf that is covered in packaging, that's a great option. Or if you can buy your milk in a reusable glass container rather than buying it in plastic or one of the paperboard cartons, that's a really great option. But unfortunately, a lot of us don't have those options locally. So, making those personal choices whenever you can, but also working and supporting policies that would incentivize companies to shift towards the reuse refill models to make those much more widely available than they currently are.
To learn more tips on how to reduce your waste and recycle the right way, head to viewpointsradio.org. You can also find information about our guests, Jenny Romer and Kate Melchis, on our website. This segment originally aired in May 2021 and was written by our executive producer, Amira Zaveri. Our studio manager is Jason Dickey. I'm Gary Price.
Coming up, having a hard time making new friends? You're not alone when Viewpoints returns. For many adults today, friendship just isn't as easy as it used to be. Between demanding jobs and family responsibilities, finding enough time to spend with friends can feel almost impossible. And if you're already struggling to maintain the relationships you have, building new connections can feel even more out of reach. According to Dr. Marissa G. Franco, professor at the University of Maryland, psychologist, and author of the New York Times bestseller Platonic, it's completely normal for people to struggle with friendship once their school-aged years are behind them.
There's the sociologist Rebecca G. Adams, and she says that friendship happens organically when we have repeated unplanned interactions and shared vulnerability. So we see people regularly. We didn't plan it. That's school, art, extracurriculars. But as adults, we don't often have that in our lives. Work, maybe we see people repeatedly, but we're not necessarily vulnerable. And so a lot of people rely on the assumption that it should just happen. It should happen organically because it did when they're kids, and they don't realize that they're in a distinct circumstance where friendship doesn't happen organically anymore, and you really have to try.
Franco adds that adults are typically less willing to be vulnerable than kids are. Young children are generally free to be their authentic selves without worrying about being judged. But as adults, we often struggle to open up in the same way, making it hard to get closer to people.
Kids are more authentic. They'll just put themselves out there. Or they'll say, I like you, let's hang out. Adults will not. They're scared. They have baggage. Fears of rejection get big, loom large, I think. And those can really get in the way of making friends. And I like to share research with people that we're a lot less likely to get rejected than we think. When people interact, they underestimate how liked they are by one another. That's called the liking gap. People fear rejection, and that's a big hindrance. But what the research finds is we're a lot less likely to get rejected than we think if we put ourselves out there.
While adults of all ages are struggling to form connections, Jeffrey Jensen Arnett, a psychology professor at Clark University, says there's a particularly tough set of challenges for younger adults. For many in this age group, it's a time marked by impermanence and uncertainty. Careers are changing, people are moving, and life feels like it's moving faster. All of this makes it harder to build and maintain lasting friendships.
You can think of the 20s, how difficult it is at that age because people move around so much. It's the age where people are most likely to change residence from one year to the next. And on average, they change where they live in the course of the 20s 4, 5, 6 times. So every couple of years, on average, they're changing where they live. And when you change where you live, you change who you're connected to. I mean, unless you're moving the next block over, which most people are not. And so the 20s have become this time of tremendous flux. And when you're moving and changing residence a lot, changing jobs a lot, changing romantic partners, your friendships or your potential friendships are going to be changing too. So it's a decade of great upheaval for most people. And friendships is one of those areas where that upheaval is taking place.
Young adults are also some of the biggest users of social media. And while these platforms are often sold as helping to keep people connected, Franco says oftentimes they only give you an illusion of closeness, when in reality, they can leave us feeling more distant and isolated.
Our networks have been diminishing steadily over time. The best, it's hard to determine what that is causally, but correlationally at least, it really seems to be about technology. People are using technology as sort of like a snack of connection, and they're no longer seeking out the meal because they can see people on Instagram. There's this theory called displacement theory. That is when you use technology to displace in-person interactions, like you're scrolling on TikTok all day instead of going to that group where you could have connected with people, then you're more likely to be lonely. Whereas if you use technology to facilitate in-person connection, you'll be least lonely, even less lonely than people that aren't on technology at all.
Franco says psychologists first noticed a sharp rise in loneliness back in 2012, just as smartphones were becoming popular. And that trend hasn't slowed. 2 years ago, the U.S. Surgeon General at the time, Dr. Vivek Murthy, formally declared loneliness a public health epidemic. At the time, a poll from the American Psychiatric Association found that 30% of adults feel lonely at least once a week, and 10% reported feeling lonely every single day. You might think loneliness isn't such a big deal, but if left unchecked, it can eventually lead to severe health consequences.
Well, first there's physical impacts, like a large, the commonly cited statistic is loneliness is as toxic for us as smoking 15 cigarettes a day, which is wild because we wouldn't smoke 15 cigarettes, but a lot of people are lonely. Having a large social network decreases your risk of death by about 45%, which is about the role of diet and exercise combined. So it's just really, really important when it comes to studies on mental health. You look at very happy people versus unhappy, and the most distinctive characteristic about them is not even how many good things happen to them. It's that they're connected. That is the most distinctive feature about very happy people. Or you look at studies on depression, and the biggest thing that prevents depression out of 106 factors was having someone to confide in one study. So connection, like food, like exercise, like oxygen, is what we need to keep us healthy.
Franco argues that loneliness isn't just a feeling. It has the power to shape the way we see the world. When people feel lonely, they're more likely to assume others will hurt, reject, or take advantage of them. That sense of suspicion makes it even harder to form connections, creating a self-perpetuating cycle. The lonelier we feel, the more we withdraw, and the more isolated we become. So what can we do to break the cycle? Arnett says one of the best starting points is finding a hobby or activity that can routinely connect you with like-minded people.
I think it's a good idea to look for organizations to join, where you would start meeting people about your age and seeing people on a regular basis. So that might be some kind of sports club. It could be something involving music. It could involve volunteering, which a lot of people like to do in their 20s. But because you don't have school anymore to structure and promote friendships, you need to find other ways to do it. And so look for organizations that are likely to draw together people your age on topics that you're interested in. Because then if you're meeting, say, for a sports team, you automatically have something in common right there. And friendships are built on common interests, usually for most people, as well as a fit of personalities. But it helps to really start with something that both of you enjoy doing.
Franco also recommends seeking out group activities, but says it's important to try and be fully present during these gatherings if you want them to actually lead to real connections.
First thing I say is it's not just going to happen. People that think it does are lonelier over time, whereas people that see friendship as taking effort are less lonely over time. And the psychological kind of mindset shift that I tell people is like, try to assume people will like you. This is based off research on something called the acceptance prophecy, this finding that when people are told they'll be accepted, they become friendlier, warmer, more open. When people think they'll be rejected, they reject people. They become closed off and withdrawn from them. And so try to assume people like you so that you can initiate and reach out. Now, when you show up at that place to connect, hopefully repeated over time, you have to overcome something called covert avoidance. That's our tendency to show up physically and check out mentally. We're on our phone. We're talking to one person we already know. We're watching the game in the corner. So you have to engage with people and say, hi, how are you liking it here? Have you been here before? And then you also want to generate exclusivity, which is experiences with one person in the group that you don't have with others. So that just looks like, hey, would you want to go for a walk before our next book club? Or would you be down to get dinner sometime, for example?
Above all, Franco reminds people that they're not alone. Social media can make it seem like you're the only one struggling with loneliness or making friends, but that's far from true. Many others are feeling the same way, and recognizing that fact can be the first step towards change.
I think we have this misconception that making friends is about me getting chosen, but everyone else is just as insecure and scared as you are. So you kind of have to do the choosing. And once you do, you might find, as one researcher puts it, nobody waves, but everyone waves back. That once you do offer that initiation and that opportunity, people are more willing to connect with you than you think.
To find out more about Dr. Marissa G. Franco, Jeffrey Jensen Arnett, and all our featured guests, visit viewpointsradio.org. You can find Franco's book, Platonic, on Amazon.com, or request copies to be stocked at your local bookstore. For more behind the scenes, check out Viewpoints Radio on X, Facebook, and Instagram. This segment was written and produced by Grace Galanti. Our executive producer is Amira Zaveri. Our studio manager is Jason Dickey. I'm Marty Peterson.
Viewpoints returns in just a moment.
This is Viewpoints Explained. I'm Ebony McMorris. Go back a decade and frozen yogurt chains were popping up left and right. People couldn't get enough of the self-serve setup, low-fat options, and countless toppings. Chains like Forever Yogurt, Menchie's, Red Mango, and more all seem to be capitalizing on the craze. But in recent years, many of these fro-yo locations have shuttered. What happened? Many industry experts say that the fro-yo bubble simply popped. What was once a staple in the dessert lineup has now been overshadowed by the next sweet treat trend. Right now, this is cookies. Americans can't seem to get enough of fresh-baked cookies that are massive in size and come in a variety of enticing flavors. Some foodies credit Levin Bakery in New York as a catalyst for this trend. The Manhattan-based bakery started in 1995 and had a strong neighborhood following for decades. However, it didn't reach national popularity until 3 or 4 years ago. Today, another cookie chain, Crumble, is pushing out the same big cookie concept, but it's more known for its long list of inventive flavors. In 2022, the CEO of Shake Shack invested $10 million into the relatively new cookie startup Chip City, which also began in New York. Today, the chain has almost 40 locations across the country. While this is impressive growth, the consumers and experts are already saying it's only a matter of time until cookies are out and something new is in. We're crossing our fingers that cupcakes make a comeback. That's Viewpoints Explained for this week. More in a moment.
Welcome to Culture Crash, where we examine what's new and old in entertainment. Author Chuck Klosterman's book is called The 90s, and it's a thorough look at the decade, its politics, its history, and of course, its culture. One thing Klosterman said he thought a lot about while writing his book was how much things have changed since the 90s. He says the stakes back then felt different. For instance, there were different expectations for everyday political engagement. In all, Klosterman said he wasn't writing the book to be nostalgic for the past, but rather that he just wanted to take a good look at it. Though Klosterman wasn't necessarily intending to ignite 90s nostalgia, we do live in an age of retro media. TV shows like Stranger Things harken back to the 80s, while movies like Lady Bird take place in the 2000s. After writing his book, Klosterman said this constant cultural nostalgia and cross-referencing is in part because the internet has made every era accessible.
So now, when we see something that seems retro, and now almost everything is to some degree retro, it can be retro to any period. So you're right, like Stranger Things has a real 80s feel, a real Spielberg 80s feel. That can be right along something like, say, the show Pen 15, which has a real 90s feel, and it doesn't seem odd. Our relationship to the movement of time is different. Something that was on television in 2005 does not seem radically different than something that is on television now. This was not the case between, say, 1965 and 1980.
As we continue to see references to past decades, it can definitely be helpful to learn more about them at the same time. If you want to learn all about the decade of the Discman and the Nintendo 64, Klosterman's book, The 90s, is available now. I'm Evan Rook.
And that's Viewpoints for this week. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to learn more about upcoming shows and find a library of past programs on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify. Plus, you'll always find previous segments and more information about our guests at viewpointsradio.org. Join us again next week for another edition of Viewpoints.